Good evening. Here's night 3 of our just 3 short lessons on Moses and civil government. And just let me give you a little quick background of how this all started. When in our current COVID-19 panic, which from the very beginning, a lot of people were crying out, this is overkill and this is way, way too extreme. And now it's showing up to be that. Again, media doesn't sell unless they're extreme and panic stricken. And I encourage you, don't let the media, I encourage people, and they don't listen to me, but I'm going to say it again, shut off the television, shut off the news. More than a few minutes morning and evening, more news than that is probably a waste of time, and it's infecting your brain. And but boys, the people of God, the government is such an encroaching monster. And we've been talking about that Monday, Tuesday night. Of course, last night was our Wednesday night service on faith. But tonight, just wrapping this up. But when we first started, and there was some pressure on why could we not have a parking lot service? Why is the government telling us we have to do an online service or do no church at all? And where in all this does the First Amendment come in, and the freedom to assemble, the free exercise of our faith? How does that fit into where we are? And we agree the government has a concern for the health and safety of the people, but our parking lot service was very much a place of, and not just ours, there are a lot of churches are doing this. Very safe. We were safer than any grocery store, safer than countless other things that are open. The dry cleaners are open. The liquor stores are open. Ice cream stores are open, and by the way, I'm glad they're all open. I think everything should have been able to be left open, and people should have been warned to be careful. And this thing of wearing a mask, I think it's hideous. I think it's creating sheep. I do it because it's the law, but it's wrong. I personally believe it's wrong, and it's great because I still believe in the First Amendment, and I can say whatever I want. And I do it, and when I'm out, when I go into stores, I'll wear one for now. But people were asking about when do we submit to government, when do we not, and of course right now there's protests going around the country. We need to go back to work, and we need to get this country back to normal again. And there's a lot of people who don't want it back to normal. There are people who love to cripple America. We had our former president, he was apologizing for America all over the world, and he would love to have crippled America permanently. And we got our current president, and he wanted to make America great again, and I'm certainly for that. He did a great job, and now we're in the current situation. Again, God is not dead in all this. But as we look at the book of Exodus, I did want to address the importance of pushback. Quickly running back to our founders, long before there was a Declaration of Independence. Now, we look at the term Declaration of Independence as a noun, and it's a document that you look at and you can't even read anymore. It's so old and so faded. But it's not a noun, it is a verb. This is our declaration that we are going to be independent of British rule. And it was a written document stating that from here on out, we're done with you. And again, I don't know if I have my Cheetos. The crunchy Cheetos are the best ones. And I'm being healthy. I've got my water here tonight. But as we look at these evening, I'm preparing myself for dinner. But as we do these evening posts, these 3 on Exodus, it's such a perfect scriptural illustration. Long before when I realized those might have been in the pictures, they just will be in the picture. But our founders were busy negotiating with the king. And if you read the Declaration, there's a bunch of grievances there. They went to the king. This grieves us. This is our complaint. And they tried and tried and tried and tried. And they tried to talk. They tried to negotiate. And finally it came to the point where they had to say, no, we're done. We're done. We're done with England. They weren't just a bunch of wild-haired rebels who just took off on their own without any brains. They had prepared and they'd planned and they'd thought and they'd negotiated. They didn't want to be free of England. That was their home. That was their country. They loved England. That's where many of these founders were born and reared and educated. And they were in America, but they loved their homeland. And it was the ridiculous oppression of the government of England that forced America, that really demanded that America do something so that they then would declare their independence. And then, of course, now we declared our independence. We got to figure out how we're going to run this thing. And so then the Constitution, it took some years. In the next few years, they got the Constitution, and that was a battle getting that together, because I had all these opinions and no one had ever done this before. So where we are currently, I am for, the right to peacefully protest is in our Constitution. And the reason for that is because in England and in pre-colonial days in Europe, you didn't have a right to protest. Remember the Red Square story not too many years ago in China? Peaceful protesters, and they just pulled out the tanks and opened the machine guns and ran people over and shot them and killed them. They don't have a right to peacefully assemble. We're Americans, we do. And when American government starts saying we cannot, then it's time we throw some people out of office. And we better throw them out of office before they get too deep of a hold. And that's what we're looking at here. So I started in Exodus. You know the story. God calls Moses to come down and deliver the people of Israel from Egypt and from bondage. And of course, God is alive in all this. Don't panic. Even when things look bad, God's still alive. And he's very capable of taking care of them in Egypt, taking care of them in the wilderness, and taking care of them in the promised land, as he did. And so we went through here in Exodus chapter 1, verse 8, and I'm just going to review quickly. But the first problem was there arose a king that didn't know Joseph and didn't know how Israel got there. And so when we elect leaders who do not know our history, they are going to violate all kinds of rules and habits that our country's been in. Why does our country do this? Because of our founders, because of our Declaration, because of our religious rights guaranteed in the Bill of Rights, because of each of those rights, search and seizure, freedom to bear arms. You go through the Bill of Rights, those things are to protect the people of God. They're very clearly laid out of who has what right to do what, and they are to protect us from our government. And understand the founders knew that government was this devouring monster who would creep over and begin taking more and more and telling farmers what they can and can't grow and telling people how they can and can't sell. And it is a difficult balance, because when you have corruption and people are selling bad meat, then the people rise up and say, we got to do something about it. So the government puts an agency in there, and the Food and Drug Administration comes in and they start regulating sales of food. Well, now we just lost some freedom to gain some protection. And every bit of protection we get gains or costs us a freedom. And the days of the Wild West when people had shootouts in the street, they were free to wield their arms at any situation. We wanted peaceful streets, and so we bring in laws, and those laws take away freedoms and begin, you can't just go shooting people because they said your mother wears army boots. And so, but because government doesn't understand the history, our governmental leaders, they start messing up their role. Number two, the government invents problems that are not there. In Exodus chapter 1, verse 9 and 10, they said, what if these people join with an enemy and the enemy comes against us? And what if the Hebrews join our enemies and attack us? And there was no problem. There was no war. There were no enemies attacking them. And our government begins to inflate things, and they inflate things so that it justifies them inflating themselves. And this goes on, and I've gone through this the last 2 nights. The government begins to encroach on people's employment, and that's huge. And we've seen that in this COVID-19, telling who can and can't go to work. And that is so arbitrary. It makes me so angry. Now, I'm glad for every business that's open, but the idea that the grocery store and the hardware store could be open, the church closed, that angers me, because we have a right to a free exercise. Go ahead and create some boundaries. But don't just say churches can't meet. Don't just say randomly you can't meet in the parking lot. And they did randomly say that. You know why? Because they don't care. They begin to encroach on people's jobs, and you can work and you can't work, and telling people what they can and can't do, and telling people how to run their business, and all these things. Number 4, we said an evil government sets up men over the common man. In chapter 1, verse 11, there were taskmasters set over the Israelite people, the Hebrews at that time. And so in our country, we've got our elected leaders, and they put all kinds of bureaucrat people, and you try and find out who it is to blame. Who is the one that's the buck stops with them? And it's shameful to many of us in America that we've got some doctors that we respect in the medical field, but they're telling us how to run our country. And we did not elect them to run our country, and we don't want them to run our country. We want them to help us when we come in with a broken leg or pneumonia or whatever it might be. And again, these are my opinions, and I'm sure you can turn on some news channel and get something more interesting and better video than my phone in my office. So number 5, the government that doesn't understand their history, the government that invents problems and makes problems bigger than they really are, and the government that begins to set leaders dominating and controlling people and begins encroaching on their personal lives. Next, they just do things to make life harder. And they made slaves of these people, and they started telling the Hebrew people where to go and to build these cities and do these things. You see, government does not like not being in control. Government loves control. It's a machine, and it doesn't matter who it is. Government loves to control things. And we as a people want somebody bigger than us to help solve our problems. But remember, every time we invite government in to solve our problem, we're surrendering a freedom to them. And they are then in control. And the government likes to control things. Every government in the world, including the one in California, in Wildomar, in Washington, D.C. Now, once government gets evil men in control, men who don't know their history, don't know their constitution, don't know who gave them the right to have their jobs, once they feel this freedom to encroach into people's lives, see, the more government begins to push into our lives, and the more they get away with, then the more junk they do. Now understand, the devil's in all this. All these people are not evil people. These things happen, but the devil's evil. And what you see there in Exodus chapter 1 and verse 15 and 16, they start killing the babies. Just like America many years ago started murdering babies, and millions of babies, of unborn babies. And now they're talking about babies that have been newly born. Or it's okay to murder those babies at the whim of a doctor or a parent. And what a tragedy. That's no different than me shooting my next door neighbor at my whim, that I feel my neighbor doesn't deserve to live, or whatever it might be. No one's got a right to do that. There's government rights for capital punishment, and those are in the scriptures. But this thing, this government killing babies, the devil hates babies. And you check any primitive culture, the devil gets into leadership, and killing babies is a big thing. The devil hates children. The devil hates children to grow up and love God. And so then the next step, the government starts asking us to do things against our conscience. Remember, the midwives were told, you kill these babies. Well, the midwives didn't want to kill those babies. And so they had to start cheating and skimping their way around and pretending to be something they weren't. And then number 8, I said, the government then seeks a way the government force people to go around these commands. The government steps in and forces the average citizen to circumvent laws. Now, we're supposed to obey laws, and we're not anti-law. We are pro-government. We are pro-law keeping. But pretty soon the laws start getting so intrusive into our lives that we begin finding ways to get around those laws. And they're the ones who are turning the citizens into criminals. And in this case, Moses' parents saw this child and said, we're not killing this baby. We're not going to. And they kept that baby as long as they could. And when they couldn't hide him anymore, they put him in that little basket and pitched it and put it in the little side overflows of the river. And Pharaoh's daughter, of course, comes down. Moses is pulled out of the water. But that whole story, that's no different than us having, us meaning Christians around the world, having to have secret church services. We're going to go secretly and underground and in basements and hidden places and out in the fields and look up Noodles Island and in our founders in our early days of our country. And Christians had to escape out there to Noodles Island, and they'd have church services out there, and they'd have guards watching. And when the constable and different people would start coming over to this island in their boats to stop the church service going on, they had all the time it took to get across, and they'd tell everybody, they'd all get to their boats, they'd scatter, and there'd just be 2 or 3 people left around a campfire and cooking or fishing or whatever. But government forces us through unjust laws to start circumventing the laws. And then I said number 9, their encroachment goes into their religious exercise. And in chapter 5, verse 2, and I'll just read a verse real quick here, and then we're new material. Pharaoh said, "Who is the Lord that I should obey his voice and let Israel go? I know not the Lord, neither will I let Israel go." This government begins telling you how to worship. And that was, and don't think it isn't being done in America. Don't think it cannot be done in America. We were told we can't have Christmas carols sung in public Christmas programs in our schools, and nativity scenes in the Capitol building, crosses on hillside. This is our country. This country does not belong to a bunch of God-hating liberals who want no Bible and no God in our country. That is not what this country was built on if they knew their history. But you go back to Europe, and 1,000+ years of European history, and you did not have a right to worship God according to your own dictates. And government begins creeping into your religion and telling you how you can and can't worship. And the world doesn't understand. In Exodus chapter 5, verse 9, the Pharaoh says, "Let their more work be laid upon the men, that they may labor therein. Let them not regard vain words." They called their religion vain. This silly religion of yours. Why do you have to meet together? And why can't you do an online church like anybody else? And why can't you be like other people? You know what? Because we're us, and we have a right to be anyone we want to be. It's called America, the land of the free, liberty and justice for all. All those quaint little sayings that our politicians today have thrown out the window that really have built us the country that we're in. Now, the government thinks your religion is a silly thing. Down at verse 9 of chapter 5, and I think I'm getting into new material. I don't know exactly where I stopped on Tuesday. A lot's happened in every 2 or 3 days. There's a bunch happens. But in chapter verse 9, I will not, in verse 9, he says, "There'll be more work on, let them not regard vain words." They think our religion is silly and vain. And then in verse 10, the taskmasters went out and their officers, and they spake to the people, saying, "Thus saith Pharaoh, I will not give you straw." Well, now, the next thing that happened is they begin to encroach further into their working lives, and they make their work harder. And by the way, historically and in archaeology, there are cities they've found down there in Egypt, buried under 2,000 years of sand, where the brick had straw in it to strengthen it, and then the straw stopped. And so this is historically backed, this event right here, by archaeology. And so government, when they get away with their evil, they start pushing it more, and they start pushing more. And the government has no problem taking your children away from you because of the school you put them in, taking your Bibles away from you. Do not doubt me on this. If our liberals in America today could, they would take our Bibles from us. And the reason they don't is because there's too much pushback. And that's this whole thing is about, is there needs to be some pushback. Somebody's got to push. And if government doesn't hit a brick wall, they're going to keep coming. Next, there's physical punishment of the citizens. Now, we don't have much of that in America. We do have a little. But you go to third world countries, you go to Korea, and of course, all through the Dark Ages in 1,500 years of European history, good people were punished because they would not submit to the government's ideas of how they should and should not worship. And you go to other countries right now, of course, all the Arab nations are this way, or most of the Arab nations are this way. There are no end of situations where when a person didn't submit to the government snapping their fingers, that they were punished. Some of you that are older would remember 1992 Ruby Ridge, Idaho, and whether the people that were involved in it were right or wrong is irrelevant to me right now. What happened is the government didn't like the way some people responded, and there was a standoff. A sniper shot a mother of a child holding her own little child, and Ruby Ridge was a tragedy, and the government, military, FBI, those people, they know it was a tragedy. They did wrong. And just not long after that, the story of Waco and the tragedy there in Waco and all that was government stretching their arms out. That was some government people who felt like the way to control this is to come in mass and to come in strong and to prove we're gonna take control of this thing. Well, what happened is there was outrage across America. And there was a lot of pushback. And nobody heard about who that sniper was that shot that innocent lady, and who actually pulled the first trigger, and who said to cause all the disastrous decisions in Waco. You never heard about anybody being punished in that. We didn't hear anything about the just more recently, the guns that were knowingly sold to drug cartel people, and our Attorney General doing it on purpose, and Border Patrol agents being killed with those very weapons. Anybody hear of anyone being punished? See, government will push and push and push, trying to encroach into our lives, just like they were here in the book of Exodus. And government will keep pushing and keep pushing and keep pushing. Of course, Moses had already come in several times and tried to reason with Pharaoh. Look, could we just go out and worship? Could we just do this? We just want 3 days journey in the wilderness. But such a battle they had to face and such difficulties. And in America, we need to be historically wise enough to know that government will keep going until someone puts the wall up and says, you're not going past here. We will resist. And the lives lost at Waco and at Ruby Ridge were tragic lives lost, but they were a help to put people back on their heels a little bit in government, to realize you're not going to get away with this. Now, the next thing that happens is, again, in chapter 5, verse 15, the officers, the children of Israel, came and cried to Pharaoh. They tried logic, they tried reason, they tried explaining, but you know what? They got slapped in the face, basically, and sent out and said, no, you're going to work and you're not going to get any help and you're not going to get what you want. Why? Because they were trying to graciously talk. It's like trying to talk to a fire and get the fire to stop. Fire is a powerful encroaching thing. It's like trying to talk to a rattlesnake. You chop the rattlesnake's head off and then everything's okay. So look with me quickly now in chapter 7. So what happens? Now God lets Israel start pushing back. And so and God does the pushing, obviously, in this, but it's a good story of how the government reacted. In chapter 7, in verse 20, and you know the story of the plagues. There's 10 different plagues come along. In chapter 7, verse 20, Moses lifted up his rod, smote the water, and the waters were turned to blood. Go over to chapter 8 and verse 4. And another plague, the frogs came up, and the frogs were in their beds, in their ovens, in their kitchens, in their everywhere. You go over to chapter 8, verse 16. The Lord said, stretch out thy rod and smite the dust of the land, it shall become lice. And there were lice throughout all the land. And in chapter 8, verse 21, the flies showed up, and there were flies everywhere. And then you go to chapter 8. Now look at chapter 8, verse 25. And so we've had plague after plague after plague. We've had 4 plagues so far. In chapter 8, verse 25, and Pharaoh called Moses and Aaron and said, go sacrifice to your God. You know why somebody pushed back? Because government likes control, government likes freedom, and government likes to order and run things. But when it starts hurting them, they say, okay, go ahead and do it. And I sat on the phone with the attorney, one of the attorneys from the health department in Riverside, with 5 attorneys on the phone. And I know there was an attorney in Temecula who was representing a group of churches, and probably more than that I don't. That's what I knew about. And there were other people, and they wouldn't give, and they wouldn't give. And finally, this is Tuesday and Wednesday. This is going on. And finally, on Friday afternoon, they said, you know what? You can have a drive-in church. And that just Easter, because Easter's a sacred day. Well, let me tell you, as independent Baptists, every day is a holy day. Every week's an important week. And Easter Sunday's not any more important than the week after, or the week after, or the week after. We think Sunday's God's day, and it's the day the people of God have been commanded to gather together for worship and preaching and prayer and praise. And we do not want to go against the health and safety laws, but we are going to go with God's laws. And we're going to find a way, if we can, a happy medium. But see, the government in this situation we're in right here did not back off until there were attorneys and pressure and pushing. Why do we have to do that? No, we don't want to fight. We've got lives to lead. We have things to do. But you know what? If somebody doesn't fight, if somebody doesn't make the phone, we need tens of thousands of phone calls. We need tens of thousands of emails. So if you have a gripe about wearing a face mask, send out 100 emails. If you've got a gripe about businesses being closed, then talk to somebody. We are in a day where your voice matters. We don't need to go shooting people, and we don't need to blow up buildings. And, in response to the Waco, we had a guy go and blow up a courthouse, and that's not the way people of God should respond. But we can respond in word, and we can respond in the ballot box, and we can respond with, we can jam up people's switchboards with tens of thousands of phone calls if we so choose. Now, it was pressure. Look over to so in chapter 8, verse 25, he said, go worship. But then as soon as all the pressure was off, The emails stopped, the phone calls stopped, the calls from attorneys stopped. Look at verse 29. Moses said, behold, I go out from thee, and I will entreat the Lord that the swarms of flies may depart from Pharaoh and from his servants and from his people tomorrow. But let not Pharaoh deal deceitfully any more in not letting the people go sacrifice to the Lord. He warned him, don't you change your mind. Don't you do it. But look over at chapter 9 and verse 17. And God says, and yet exaltest thou thyself against my people. God says, be careful. You be careful. You're lifting yourself up. Chapter 9, verse 27. There's a couple more plagues come along the way. Hail comes down, destroying everything. Boils come. There's a disease killing all the cattle. And then you look down at chapter 9 and verse 27. And Pharaoh sent and called for Moses and Aaron and said, I've sinned this time. The Lord is righteous. I and my people are wicked. Go worship. And he says, God, I want you to go. And as soon as the pressure's off, chapter 9, verse 35, and the heart of Pharaoh was hardened, neither would he let the children of Israel go. Why? The emails stopped, the complaints stopped, the phone calls stopped. And when government doesn't think they're going to get in trouble, they're going to go and they're going to encroach more into the lives of people. This is the 12th time Moses has had to appear before Pharaoh. 12 different times he's gone in there. And again, the people of God are the people who are Bible readers. I'm talking about the people who love their Bible and love their church and love their homes. They're peaceful. They want a home, a church. They want to be able to go to work and pay the bills. And they want to be left alone. We are not a revolutionary people. But if somebody doesn't rise up and put the pressure on somebody, Moses in this case and Aaron, 12 different visits, had to go there and push and push and push. More plagues come along and more difficulties come. And so in chapter 10, look down there with me at verse 7. Chapter 10, verse 7, Pharaoh's servant said unto him, how long shall this man be a snare to us? Let them men go. Everybody around Pharaoh knew the country's being destroyed. Let these people go. And Pharaoh says, all right, who's going to go? You want to go? Who can go? In verse 8. And who are them that shall go? And now he's trying to regulate their worship again. He's still trying to control worship. And you can bet on it. Our government is set on controlling worship in this country because the people of the book are hard to rule because we are ruled by the book. And that's why when Mao and Stalin and people like that took over their countries, they wanted to get rid of Bibles and churches. They outlawed children being brought into, you old people go to church and die, but we're not letting the young people do it. And that's why in the Middle Eastern Muslim countries, they don't want Bibles. This Bible scares people. This Bible in the hearts of men brings freedom and confidence and assurance. And but as soon as the pressure's off, Pharaoh says, no, you can't go. And then, so they have more trouble. And so it goes on and on. But they're still in chapter 10, verse 24. Pharaoh called to Moses and said, go, serve the Lord. Only let your flocks and your herds be stayed. Let your little ones go. All right, not just men. Bring your wives, bring your children. Believe your economic stability here. You see, he wanted to still control these guys. Pharaoh wanted to control. If you don't bring your animals, then I've got control of you. I've got your businesses. And see, the government wants our business because it's our economic ties. And then the government wants our churches because it's our religious ties. And somebody needs to pray down some plagues of emails and phone calls. And all that's necessary for evil to triumph is good men to do nothing. And we are in a day when we can say and do much within the realms of decency. And of course, the last plague in chapter 11, the firstborn die. The firstborn of every house that wouldn't put the blood on the door, and a picture of a cross, the blood on top of the door on either side of the door, and just symbolic of the cross that one day God's Son would die on, and the death angel would pass over those homes, and thus the Passover, the Jewish Passover, all these years. And the poor Jewish people forever have celebrated the Passover, not knowing it was the cross of Jesus Christ that they continually celebrate. They miss the Savior, but they're going to get it one day. One quick story. And by the way, a philosophy here. God didn't call Moses to straighten out Egypt's political world, nor did he call us to straighten out Washington, D.C. It doesn't matter who we elect. If we get a bunch of congressmen and senators and we get bureaucrats, look, it's going to be an encroaching monster. It's government. Rather than getting off on another subject, This has been long enough. I'll cut it off here. We'll just say this. All of this is to say it's okay to resist. It's okay for us to say, no, we're not going to do it this way. And we're in a difficult world. Sinners run it. Sinners are citizens, and sinners are governmental leaders. And boy, it's so good to know we have God, though. That's the best thing in this whole story is all that Israel went through, getting out of Egypt, and then the struggles in the wilderness, getting into the promised land. They had God, and that's what we have. And our hope, obviously, we want to keep our government as much in subjection to the Constitution and to the will of the people as we can. But you know what? When government goes bad, God's still good, and heaven's still real. And I'm looking forward to seeing Jesus. There's nothing on this world, or on this planet, I'm looking forward to anything at all that would matter to me compared to seeing the Lord Jesus Christ. And so I want to encourage you, stay close to Him. And we can be civic minded. We can be involved in our community. But let's don't panic if the government's bad, because it's assumed government will be this devouring beast. It's gonna happen, and we'll push it back, and then we might have a little respite. We'll have some peace, and then it's gonna come and cause grief again, and that's just reality. And somebody's gonna have to stand up and fuss a little bit, and I'm grateful. I'm grateful for those who do. Let's be busy for God. All right, let's pray. Pray for souls to get saved. We're raising money. A lot of folks are thinking they're putting in some of this stimulus money into buying a good quality gospel tract to go to every home in our nearby area here. And we can't knock on the door, but that doesn't mean we can't put the gospel in their mailbox. And pray that that would find the right homes and hearts and touch people's hearts. We got a big banner we're putting up on the street out here to invite people to our drive-in church. Pray that we can see people saved. We want to make a difference for God. And under any government, in any country, God is King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and He's the ruler, and He's the one we need to promote and preach and love and worship, and He's who we want other people to love as well. What a great God we serve. What a privilege to serve the King of Kings. See you tomorrow night, and of course be praying for our weekend that God would bless and touch hearts and use the services for His glory.